Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, adapted from the novelisation by J.R. Millward, based on an original story by A. Murty Schofield, with J.R. Millward and Adam Coover, with music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Episode 13.
When I was a little girl, my parents had unanimously agreed to further my education by sending me away during the school summer holidays. At the time, I'd barely taken any notice of the Crofts' rather distant attitude towards their daughter. Being parcelled up and posted to every corner of the country instead of staying at home had seemed like an adventure every time. On one occasion, I had to be rescued by coastguards when I wandered too far along the beach at Lyme Regis, convinced in my 6-year-old way that, like Mary Anning before me, I would find a huge prehistoric monster buried in the cliff face. Another time, I lost my sandwiches to a herd of fallow deer at Chatsworth House whilst I was paddling in a stream, too entranced by the shimmering stones and sticklebacks to pay the deer much attention. I went water skiing on Lake Windermere, counted puffins on Ely, and got into trouble in the Tower of London for leaving finger marks on the cases that held the crown jewels. Nowhere, however, had fascinated my younger self more than the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. Should the opportunity ever arise, you might enjoy a visit. Head for the palm houses, those monuments to Victorian extravagance wrought from iron and sparkling glass. While you walk in the dappled light below the tree ferns and orchids, try to imagine a little girl, all coltish arms and legs, her brown hair plaited and bouncing as she skips through the greenery. If you're lucky, you might even find the secret corner I found, where I could lie staring up into the towering fronds, with warm, coppery sunlight on my cheeks, and the air redolent with the heady aroma of wet earth and fertiliser. So evocative was the smell that it took me a moment to remember where I really was, as hot, rainforest damp air wrapped me in a steamy blanket. I stood, goggling like an idiot. Whatever I'd expected to find under the Strahov, this was not it. A butterfly the size of a starling glided past, its wings glowing as though they'd been dipped in fluorescent paint. It alighted on a flower that could have doubled as a euphonium, one of dozens hanging down from a trunk wider than my outstretched arms and covered in coarse knobbles. Poisonous orange stamens like octopus legs emerged from the magenta petals and twitched lazily at the passing insects. And that was the most normal-looking thing in the room. Already sweating, I stalked cautiously down the paved terrace that divided the room's length. Overhead, a glass roof arched tens of metres high, supported by lacy ironwork and brick pillars as magnificent as any hothouse built in Victoria's reign. The ceiling shone with an eerie, sourceless glow indistinguishable from sunlight. I could hear water tinkling as if from a dozen fountains, and hidden insects chirped, buzzed, hissed and croaked incessantly. Plants were everywhere, climbing through, around and over each other with fractal complexity. The arrangements may have been intended as formal, but had long since spilled into botanical anarchy, so that regal battalions of giant bulrushes were forced to stand their ground against encroaching, nauseatingly purple vines that throbbed like exposed blood vessels. Primeval-looking palms creaked under the weight of drooping, acid-green blooms, whose fanged mouths gaped hungrily as I went past. I passed under the shade of 3-metre-wide leaves like splayed hands, and strings of flowers tinier than grains of rice strung from cobweb. The air was so thick with moisture and smells it was like a drug. The wholesome scents of rose, eucalyptus, mown grass and pine resin, mingling with putrefying flesh, mildew and overripe fruit. If hell ever needed an arboretum, this would be it. I had to pause to wipe my face. My long camouflage trousers, so well suited to raiding Parisian tombs and surviving Prague's late-season snows, were rapidly turning into quite literal sweatpants. After a moment's hesitation, I hunkered down behind one of the flower beds and shook them off. A minute's work with my tough little utility knife, thank you, Wren, and I had reduced them to more user-friendly, if slightly frayed, shorts. What I have to work with. Oh, that's better. Keep the rest. Leave no signs we were here. Plus, we might need them again later. Damn, and I left my sewing kit back home. One problem at a time, girl. One problem at a time. A bee like a gilded walnut zoomed past my nose as I adjusted my holsters around my now bare thighs. Reflexively, I swatted at it, but jumped back sharply as a flower head lunged towards me. The insect, and very nearly my face, vanished in a crunch of petals. Oh, bloody hell!
Who are you?
In seconds, my guns were levelled at the source of the voice. A portly man, sporting an archaic pith hat, stepped out from behind the curtain of leaves, brushing compost off his hands. His flabby mouth twisted in what might have been distaste as he spotted me.
Intruder sinistrajo!
He didn't get very far. In a contest between me and him, even the handicap of my sitting start didn't make any difference. I rugby tackled his ankles and he collapsed with a porcine grunt, his immense stomach cushioning the impact of the paving. In moments, I had my scorpion pressed to his brow. Don't breathe, and definitely don't move.
You're in big trouble, whoever you are. Intruders don't last long in Strahov.
I'll bet. What exactly are you and your buddies up to in here?
You mean you don't know? You don't know about the great work?
Enlighten me. It's Dr. Muller, isn't it?
That's right. You really don't know what the Cabal is. We are a beginning of a new order of life on Earth.
New order? Is that what you're working on in here?
Beautiful, aren't they? These are only the beginning of a glorious restoration. Every specimen you see has been bred for superior genomes. Nature has gone weak under man, but with the coming of the Nephilim, the earth shall blossom as never before.
Is that right? Well, good news for your shareholders in Cabal composting, I suppose.
Ignorant mortal. The Cabal is more powerful than you can possibly imagine. We control everything here that goes on here in Prague. It means that we are going to be immortal, and that you are going to be dead. Dead! Intruder!
Immortal? That is impressive. How are you going to manage that?
Meister Eckhart is about to return the Nephilim race to glory. For our part in that triumph, he will grant us immortality.
Oh, if I had a coconut every time some lunatic said something like that.
See? Your pathetic ignorance blinds you. We already have the last vital element from Turkey here in the Strahov. The cubiculum Nephilim. The sleeper! Yes, the last of the extinct race here in the Strahov.
Wonderful. Oh, wait, let me guess. Wake the sleeper, solve world hunger, and bring peace to all mankind.
You see? Ignorance! With vital essence is extracted from this precious specimen, Meister Eckhart can breed the next generation of pure Nephilim. No more abominations to run amok like Boaz's proto-Nephilim.
Yes. Highly inconvenient having abominations running around loose, isn't it? The man clearly ticked all of the boxes marked deranged maniac. But there was nothing to him that suggested true danger. Standing there in his water-stained green shirt, with his broken glasses, dripping pith hat, and lips puckered in a fish-like scowl, Mullah was hardly the picture of deadly arch-villainness. Which just goes to show that you can be a world-renowned archaeologist adventurer, the survivor of countless life-or-death struggles, and a bastion against the forces of evil, and still get things, as it were, dead wrong.
You have no idea who you are mocking.
Before I could react, he snatched a big old-fashioned spray gun from a pile of tools on the nearest planting bed, and my world vanished in a choking acidic cloud. I dropped the gun, flinging both hands out to soften my fall. My eyes and skin were suddenly on fire, as surely as they'd been drenched in petrol and set alight. My screams came out as nothing but a hiss. The infernal chemical reacted with my eyes and throat, swelling the passageways with bile and blisters, cutting off my air supply. We take our ability to breathe for granted so often it's scary. Take that away and, without the benefit of foresight or training, most people panic. I didn't panic, but it was a close thing. All thoughts of Mullah vanished in my desperation, and my flailing limbs knocked blindly against bricks and yielding wet leaves. I tripped, but down on the ground the air was clearer, and I instinctively crawled towards the sound of water. My hands splashed into a basin of a shallow fountain, and I threw myself under the blissful cascade. My eyes had puffed up as though from a killer dose of hay fever, and my throat felt like I'd been merrily knocking back mouthwash laced with drain cleaner. By the time my normal thought processes resumed, Mullah had, predictably, vanished. He must have known the poison wouldn't kill me instantly, just incapacitate me long enough for him to finish me off. But he hadn't. The attack had been a distraction, nothing more. Bloody mad scientists. We've got to get away from here. Mullah will send every guard in the place after us now. Well, at least he confirmed our suspicions about the sleeper. We know Bouchard was right about Eckhart trying to revive the Nephilim race. Yeah, I noticed. A shame he didn't factor me into his equations. What did you have in mind? Find him, kill him. I'll destroy the paintings regardless of what the Cabal throws at me. But Eckhart is mine. Always nice to have a firm objective. But be careful, Lara. I've been thinking, and Horace was right. You can't let this turn into simple revenge. I wasn't planning on it. And as long as the paintings exist, Eckhart will try to use them. Even if we destroy them and Eckhart escapes, he'll keep trying to revive the Nephilim. He's the Black Alchemist. A civilized chat isn't going to convince him to give up. If he was just another misguided thug following orders, or, hell, even an ordinary mortal, I'd say he'd warrant a second chance. But he chose this path a long time ago. He's not interested in attending Villains Anonymous. I'm not here as his confessor, or to help him find redemption. I'm here to save a lot of other people from getting killed, and I'll leave the fate of his soul to those with better qualifications. I clicked a fresh clip into my Scorpion. For good measure, I made sure the straps of my Viper SMG were loose enough for me to unholster it at a microsecond's notice. My inner companion fell quiet, although I could still feel her hovering close in my thoughts. Her agreement was a cautious thing, touching my awareness with something akin to regret. Her actions didn't surprise me. It's sobering to realise that she must take a life. Eckhart was a monster. The choice to kill him may have been made in anger, but all I felt as I ghosted my way through Dr. Muller's hideous garden was a sense of cold purpose. Had I been in any doubt of Eckhart's humanity, my subconscious would have been mounting open rebellion. But the memory of Ludwig's cries was still fresh in my mind. Maggie had been right to warn me, but we both knew things had changed. I wasn't a fugitive seeking revenge anymore. My journey had taught me that Werner's killer was something far more sinister than a disgruntled client or criminal mastermind. People like that get caught by the police. Those cases were easy. Eckhart was something else altogether. The authorities could do nothing against the monstrum, except examine the bloody scenes he left behind and tremble with mortal impotency. The Black Alchemist was not a foe to be taken into custody, tried by a jury, or go quietly to prison or the executioner's block. By circumstances or fate, I had made it this far. It was arrogant to think I was the one chosen to destroy Eckhart, but I was damned if I was going to let this opportunity just pass me by. Call me stubborn, pig-headed, or just lucky, and people have, numerous times, but I'd already taken on demigods and monsters, rogue scientists, and all the majesty and terror of good old Mother Nature. My trophy room was stuffed, often literally, with evidence of my exploits, with perhaps the biggest prize being that I was still alive to admire them. If anyone stood a fair chance of bringing the monstrum's reign of terror crashing down, it was me. Well, me backed up with mountains of ammunition, boundless self-confidence, and Egyptian guardian angels lending me their supernatural and moral support. But you get the idea. A line of muddy scuff marks revealed Muller's trail. He'd hustled through a maze of bedding plants, past the dripping jaws of a man-sized Venus flytrap, up several flights of stairs and through an ornate doorway, into an entirely functional service corridor. Here there was no extravagant ironwork or painted tiles, just drab concrete and pipes wheezing steam as I went past. I kept one eye on the footprints and the other scanning for trouble. My shadow bent and ballooned as I flitted underneath electric bulbs, but the corridor was too narrow for anyone to sneak past me unawares. After 5 minutes or so, the footprints faded and then vanished altogether. Trust the good doctor to be so inconsiderate. But I needn't have worried. The corridor ended only 10 yards ahead of me, next to a doorway with words stenciled in lurid yellow on the wall. Biodome. Level 3 security only. Nowhere for you to hide now, Doctor. Freeze! What the devil? Oh, that's just lovely. The love child of a caterpillar and a squid. Hungry, too. Through the open door, something thing uncurled long feelers, groping the air like a puppy sniffing for food, and gave a thin screech. Its lumpy, grub-like body barely came up to my knees. Yeah, and it's bringing the family. I turned to face more of the things that were wriggling up the stairs towards me. The stairs led into a lofty chamber decorated in Muller's eccentric neo-Victorian style. Instead of plants, however, the floor sprouted row upon row of upright glass cylinders, each one broad enough for me to have swum down. Many of them contained curled-up specimens, virtually identical to the grubs that were scrubbling after my bootlaces. Several more tanks had been smashed, spilling urine-coloured fluid, and presumably the escapees that were now crowding around my feet. Get off! Go! Get away! I aimed a kick that sent the closest grub sailing away with a squeal. The others pressed in until I opened up with short bursts of gunfire. The grubs died easily enough, bursting with sick-making effect. I kept my fire on manual to save ammo, but as the 5th or 6th grub died, the others turned as one disordered mass of bodies and scurried away. Ha! Go on, scat! No dinner for you here. Whimpering, the grubs scurried and hid behind the tubes like woodlice under a log. Their bodies were so bulky that not all of them could fit. Multiple appendages stuck out, quivering with hunger or fear. I could have picked them off easily. But then the little horrors did something unexpected. They all raised their pincers and screeched a new sound. A sound so loud and high-pitched that most of the light bulbs in the chamber instantly shattered, as did the remaining tanks. Bloody hell! I clutched my head as blood trickled from my ears and nostrils. A pain so acute it was like having needles shoved into my brain. Half blind and almost deafened, I sensed myself becoming surrounded by dozens of scurrying bodies. I could feel their eager clicking and just make out shadows bounding toward me at terrific speed. More abominations. Some only babies, others the size of wolves. All of them eager to capitalise on their wounded prey. I staggered backwards and brought my viper round from its holster. Pincers lunged, ready to swipe a chunk from my belly, and disappeared in an explosion of light and thunder from the rifle's muzzle. The light fell on a scene of chaos. I held my finger on the trigger for full automatic, spraying the swarm with controlled fire. Limbs burst and swollen bodies ruptured. Grubs curled up and scampered, but slipped in the slime of their fallen siblings. The bigger monsters were more heavily armoured and took several direct hits before they died. The screeching and reek of their ichor filled me with loathing on a primal level. From the deepest depths of time, when the human race first learnt to associate maggots and their ilk with death and decay. But still, there were more of them than my one little rifle could manage. Come on, girl. Any suggestions? What do I know? You're the one with the gun. Use those subliminal senses of yours. Find me a way out. I can't hold them off forever. Look, I only know this place has 2 exits. The one we came in by, and look out! It was a bellow from the darkest reaches of sweat-soaked nightmare, and raked my already tender ears like a buzzsaw through a meringue. All I could make out of the creature standing over me was a man-shaped shadow. Loops and spurs coiled through its misshapen flesh like barbed wire. It bellowed again, possibly because I'd just kicked it as hard as possible where its groin should have been. I scrambled, hauling the viper after me, and brought it to bear on the shambling newcomer. The grubs had retreated, whimpering, as if the man-thing was an even more intimidating foe than a woman with an automatic rifle. That thought was not a happy thought. As it lunged towards me, I had a glimpse of bone-like blades in place of hands. Light erupted from the gun, and I saw that its face, indeed, its whole body, was a tangled mass of living vines. It had no eyes, only holes with curling tendrils sprouting from the sockets that writhed like insect antennae. It opened its mouth in a roar and scythed those killer limbs again. I was faster, but only just. To my horror, the bullets passed straight through without slowing it down. The creature hissed, but kept coming, forcing me to duck another incoming blow. So, more topiary monster than tree monster. Maggie, that second exit would be really handy around about now. Over there, 10 steps to your right. There's a ladder. If you just jump... Come on, Lara. You can do it. However well-designed the mutants were for killing, no one in the Cabal had thought to teach them how to climb ladders. The Horde's howling was all the extra impetus I needed to ignore my bleeding arm and throw myself onto the ladder and climb like I'd never climbed before. Claws and pincers scrabbled at my retreating boots, but I was soon out of reach. For a hair-raising moment, it looked like Topiary Man would try to follow me, but his talons were just too big to allow him to gain any purchase. As I reached the top and dared to look down, I saw him slice through the ladder with a swipe of pure frustration, his talons making short work of the solid steel. Had I been a nanosecond slower, the same thing would have happened to my arm. The bleeding was getting worse, so I quickly dashed through a service exit and into yet another bland corridor. I slammed the door, leaned against it, and listened with relief as the furious howls gradually faded. Once again, I winced and mentally thanked Werner for the use of his medical supplies. The cut was long but shallow and traced a sweeping 8-inch line down my upper arm. I swallowed, acutely aware of how close I'd come to losing the arm entirely, and began sterilizing and bandaging. It would have been neater had I been able to use both hands, but eventually I was satisfied that the bleeding had stopped, and I wasn't likely to die of infection in the next 10 minutes. I felt the stinging discomfort in my ears lessen. Perforated eardrums hurt like hell, but I had enough hearing left over to reassure me that mine was still intact. Any doubts I may have harboured about the nature of the Cabal's new order have been thoroughly trampled. The thought of just one of those grubs on the loose in Prague was enough to inspire a shiver. And this is before Eckhart has managed to rebreed the Nephilim. Don't despair, Lara. Whatever it takes, we'll stop them. I'm glad one of us is confident. Now, don't we have a psychopath to track down? I gathered my things, noting my ammo supplies with a twinge of dismay. Even with conservative usage, the fight had soaked up more than half of my Viper's ammunition. Muller probably went another way, or used an exit we didn't see. I doubt he'd have lasted long with those beasties on the loose. Unless they saw him as Daddy and left him alone. The plants seemed quite responsive to him. He could even have trained them to attack strangers. Most people use guard dogs. The corridor had opened out. I paused in the doorway, scanning for trouble. More cloned sunlight filtered down from the ceiling, illuminating a neat garden and terrace leading up to a set of wrought iron doors. Butterflies sipped nectar from baby pink and gold orchids. Ivy cloaked the brick walls. Water trickled into a basin heaped with mosses, and the air was sweet with the scent of mown grass. It was as pleasant a scene as any I'd encountered so far in the Strahov. The semblance of normality was, of course, an illusion. Standing sentinel beside the doors was a tree, its bare branches and greyish, pustule-covered trunk marking it out as one of Muller's home experiments. As I stepped up for a closer look, its limbs snaked their way through the door's intricate metalwork, like a speeded-up film of a bramble twining through a fence. Gagging from the rotten fish smell, I reached across and tried to tug one of the branches loose. It slapped me across the face. I staggered back, my cheek glowing red-hot. The tree's strength was incredible, more steel cable than plant. The livid welt had just missed my eye. I would probably have a handsome scar as compensation. The tree obviously wasn't going to be persuaded to let go. And, as I swiftly discovered, bullets had about as much effect on it as soap bubbles. So, you're not going to cooperate with the usual methods, are you? Time to introduce it to our friend, lateral thinking. Oh, come on, Lara. There must be some way to get it to release. How else do people get in and out of the doors? They ask nicely, perhaps. Maybe I'm missing something. Grumbling, I conducted a thorough sweep of the garden. In a crowded shed tucked away behind a curtain of vine leaves, I found more evidence of Muller's handiwork. Row upon row of shelves groaned under the weight of pots, seed trays, tools, and jute sacks of fertilizer. The interior was fusty with the smells of leaf mould and tobacco. Antiquated spray guns were stacked along one wall, beside a table piled high with papers and jotters. Intrigued, I slid onto the tottering stool and shuffled through the notes. There were diagrams of devices, both familiar and outlandish, from straightforward irrigation equipment to organic-looking machines under the headings of intrastomata feeding apparatus or chlorophyll harvester. Tables of ingredients had been meticulously copied, crossed out and annotated. Several had even been stamped with a red-barred circle, the universal no-no sign. An idea formed. If I can't persuade it or shoot it, maybe I can try weed killer. Has to be worth a try. What? What are you smirking for? Oh, it's nothing. Carry on. Look, it might not be sanctioned by the Navy SEALs, but it's the only plan I've got. And if it works, you'll be awarded a medal for Mistress of Unconventional Weaponry. Just get on with it. It took 5 minutes to locate the various ingredients from the jars stacked hither and thither, and another 5 mixing the poison in a handy steel bucket. I eyed the nearby spray guns, but dismissed them as too finicky, especially when drops of the chemical soup sloshed over the side and left smoking holes in the wooden floor. The fumes were starting to get to me when I finally lugged the concoction back to the guardian tree. Its roots spread out across the ground like the tentacles of a decaying octopus. My first choice of target. There are reasons why I leave the caring, attentive side of gardening to Winston. The tree went berserk. I leapt back, dropping the bucket and barely avoiding the branches as they thrashed in a drunken frenzy. The trunk withered before my eyes like a drink carton being sucked dry, and the branches sagged with the limpness of overcooked pasta. In less than a minute, the whole tree lay drooping, barely able to support its own weight. This time, I strode past unmolested and paused to listen at the doors. Well, it can't be anything worse than those grubs, can it? Do you know the meaning of Murphy's Law, Maggie? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Oh, come on, girl. I was only trying to lighten the mood. If I said there's bound to be a giant pink mutant rhinoceros in a tutu on the other side of the door, then reality is bound to prove me wrong. Think of it as being prepared. Sometimes the impropriety of one's inner thoughts is enough to test even the most saintly patience. Shaking my head, I took a deep breath and resumed my listening. The seconds ticked by, but either there were no nasties lurking beyond, or the doors were too well soundproofed for me to tell. I made up my mind and heaved until the wrought iron creaked open just enough to let me slip through. My gaze travelled up and up and up. Well, at least it isn't a giant pink rhinoceros. You're right. It's crazier.
In episode 13 of Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, Lara Croft was played by J.R. Millward. Dr. Grant Muller was played by Adam Coover. Written and adapted by J.R. Millward. Based on an original story by A. Murty Schofield. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Additional sound effects courtesy of www.freesfx.co.uk, the BBC and the YouTube Audio Library. Produced by Stephen Millward. Lara Croft and Tomb Raider are the property of Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix.